Greetings, is Fred Roll from Dillingham, Alaska, Curry Young Tribal Council member. Some updates. Cousin Nikolai's doing not so well. Prayers to him. Alejandro, give me a shout. Sent you a text. Need to chat to you. And thanks everyone for joining us here. All the new subscribers. We're like already over 1,000. It's crazy. Appreciate the support, everyone. Applying for the grants and all that stuff. Waiting on a call back from Curry Young Tribal Administrator in Dillingham. And the project's moving forward. Has just been altered and changed a little bit just because of logistics and funding is crazy. So today I wanted to share with you guys, this happened in 1984. This trapper, he is 92 right now. He was, of course, a younger guy, but he was in his twilight of trapping, and he knew it. And he had been going to this place where this occurred is in the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta, northeast of Bethel. So he had been doing this off and on for about 35 years at this point before this incident happened, and he had 3 different cabins for 3 different set lines. And this particular one that he kind of used every so often, and it was very fruitful, but he'd hear weird screams off in the distance at night, and something was unsettling about that. So he rarely would trap there. Only every so once in a while, when he really wanted to get his fur count up, he would swing in for a few sets and then get out of there. He just really felt uneasy. Well, it so happened that his other 2 trap lines had been taken over disrespectfully, and he didn't want to fight and argue about it with some youngsters, doing their thing. So he went to his backup spot. Well, he had been there approximately 1 week, and during that 1 week, he heard no screaming or anything. He was very comfortable, very comfortable. He felt like, geez, what a relief. I'm back at it. There's no craziness going on off in the distance. So up till this point, everything's been out of sight, out of mind, outside of some strange noises, So part of where he has it set up is where the cabin faces out. He made a little shed to park his, at the time he had one of those Arctic Cat Jaguars or Panthers, with the leopard spotted seats. Great sleds for what they were, but easily stuck. So he's doing his thing, and he right outside in that shed where the snow machine is parked, part of it had this little hangover, little like covered porch type thing offset from it, where he had all his traps and all his gear set, and he'd go out there and boil it and spruce bough and stuff. And so he was in that process when he got there, and he had been boiling stuff and plotting. He had set a few, test lines to see which direction he wanted to run his lines, because he had a couple different options from this cabin. And so he decided he was going to split it up. He was going to set some Wolverine sets down this way, some Martin sets over here, and then just a general set on this one place. So he's doing his thing. Nothing's going on, nothing wrong. He's just feeling great. Well, he fires up the snow machine, and he takes off to check. He had set 3 Wolverine traps just as a tester, just to feel the ground, whatever you want to call it. So when he gets there, he notices that the traps are sprung, but only pieces of fur left, and he could tell it was Wolverine fur. He knew what the hell it was, but where's the Wolverine? So he's looking for tracks for something that was coming along eating the Wolverine. And he had caught something in all 3, and all that was left in the trap was some Wolverine fur and some flesh. So he knew that they were trapped dead and something got them. So he was like, well, what the hell? There's no bears out. So he started kind of looking around, saw nothing, noticed some old tracks, what looked like old tracks, someone's snowshoes is what he thought. And he goes, oh, I must have crossed over into someone else's trap line and didn't realize it, and they didn't like it, so they cut my Wolverine out of the traps as a sign not to trap here. So okay, I'll just stay out of this part of it, and I'll use my other 2 runs to get my furs up. Now, he told me that when when he was pulling the traps and getting them ready to reset or whatever and throwing them in the sled, that there's a real foul odor coming from the snares and the traps or whatever themselves. Real funky, musty, and he couldn't pinpoint it, but it was just a real strong musty smell, and he just couldn't understand. Threw him in the sled, went on about his way, went back to the cabin, uh, changed up his gear, and continued on because he had to go past his cabin anyway to get to the other line. So as he was changing out his gear and everything, he ran into the cabin and he grabbed his rifle. And he grabbed his rifle because something was different. He had a little 22 to dispatch any live animals, but something told him he wanted a heavier caliber gun. So he went and got his odd 6. Jumps on the sled, slings it over his shoulder, and he takes off to his other line. And he sets out for Martin and whatnot, and not feeling anything was wrong. Now on his return trip, you got to understand these trap lines can run for miles, and this particular one was about a 10-mile run because you don't want a bunch of traps in 1 acre distance. You got 50 traps. That's just ridiculous. That's not how you do it. So he's at the end of his run, and he's pretty low on fuel, but he has plenty to get back to where he needs to, as long as he doesn't get stuck or, God forbid, slip a track, because those old sleds will slip a track quick if you're not paying attention. So he's just doing his thing. He turns around, he goes around in a circle a few times to pack it, and so he's basically fixing the end of his run so he has this turnaround. Now he starts coming back, and as he's coming back, he's reaching the first part of his sets. Now where he had set them, he knew they were prime spot. There was sign everywhere of Martin, so he was like, yes, this is going to be great, because Martin that particular year was bringing a little more of a premium than previous years at the time. Now, as he's coming up to the first place he set, he noticed it was sprung, but there was nothing there, so he stops because he has it set up to where he can see it from his trail. He doesn't want to have to park the snow machine and go back 100 yards to look at his trap. No, it's right there. So he goes and investigates, and he notices these tracks. And he can't place them because there's no definition. They just look like snowshoe tracks almost, but without any real definition to them. So he's trying to figure out, he's trying to look around and see what the hell. And he goes and he checks, and the bait's still in there. Bait's still in the box. It's just the trap was sprung and hanging. So he was like, that's weird. So he reset it, put it in place, and continued back to the cabin. When he gets back to the cabin, he notices out of the tree line, these tracks came like bipedal walking right in line right up to his little snow machine shed where he hangs his traps out. All his traps were flung everywhere. There was some on top of the cabin, some behind the cabin. He said it was like someone grabbed them, wung them around, and flung them, and wherever they went, they went. And he was upset. So he takes the rifle off and he's looking around. And then he starts following the tracks. He's like, who in the hell is doing this? And as he's going along, he had strapped on his snowshoes so he could follow it, because these tracks went right into the deep woods. He wasn't going to take his snow machine. So he went on foot. He wanted to be quiet and figure out what this person's problem is. But as he's walking along, it dawns on him, it's taken him 2 to 3 steps to equate 1 stride of these tracks. So he's approximately 50, 75 yards in the trees following this thing when it dawns on him something's not right. So immediately he's gets the EBGBs, turns around, goes right back to the cabin. Now when he comes back to the cabin, he's going up into the door and he notices those tracks. Made a couple circles around the cabin, met back over by the shed, and then continued on into the woods. He didn't notice that because he had tunnel vision to follow it into the woods, and then he noticed it had been around the cabin. So he, high alert, very high alert. Like, yeah, I mean, definitely, I would be too. And what the hell? So he gets inside and he's just contemplating, what am I dealing with? Now, it's getting on in Alaska. We don't have very much daylight in the wintertime. You're talking in that area probably 3-4 hours of sunlight, and the rest of the time the light's on the horizon, and it's always like perpetual dusk, if not dark. So he's lighting his candles and stuff, and he was getting ready to. He had stoked his fire, and he's getting ready to start dinner. And he's milling this stuff around, and he always had himself a little whiskey with him to warm up with, as he told me. And so he took a little sips to warm up. Now, as he's doing this, he hears crunching of snow, very heavy crunching of snow, just, and it's heavy and rapid, and it sounds like it's out just outside the cabin, but it starts up out of nowhere. It was like you would think he would hear it coming and approaching, and then the sound, but no, it just started. So immediately he grabs his gun and he starts looking out. He had 4 windows in this place, one on each wall of the cabin, and had a very heavy duty bear door and all that kind of stuff. So he was in there secure, but he something was off immediately. He removed the skillet from where he was cooking on top of the wood stove and went and looked out the window. And as he's looking out the window, he's looking off to his left, and because that's the last place he heard the sound. So he's just kind of holding the rifle at a low ready, just kind of like, looking around, and he notices out of his right eye something dark, and he turns and looks, and he's face to face with this thing. It looks him in the eye, shows its teeth, and walks away. Now, he said when it did that, he didn't even realize that when he like was done processing what just happened, he like snapped out of it under his bed, clutching the rifle, and he was screaming out, and he started praying out loud, real loud, Jesus help me, Jesus help me. And as he's doing this, and he's getting back out from under the bed because he feels he needs to, where's this thing at? He said he didn't feel like it was there to share trapping tips or share some berries. He said it felt very, he felt stuck. He felt, he didn't say he felt like he was being hunted. He felt like he was being tactically observed, we'll call it. And basically checking him out, hey, how much trouble is this guy going to be? That's what he said. Now, I'm just conveying what this guy felt. I wasn't there, so, whatever. Now, as he's up and he's still praying out loud, he realized that he had soiled himself with this encounter, which it boggled his mind because, he'd been out in the woods forever, never had anything like that happen. So he's changing and he's cleaning up, and he had drew all his curtains to block out the light, so he had to relight candles so he could see, because it was a small cabin, really dark, wintertime, and so he gets changed up, cleaned up, and then he's sitting on his bed and he's reading his Bible. Now he's saying the Lord's Prayer to himself, and also the 23rd Psalm, I believe it is, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. So as he's doing this, he hears, he said it sounded like it had to have been a mile away, just this horrific scream that just bellowed and then ended in a high-pitched kind of scream. So as he's contemplating, what the hell, and he's reciting these Bible verses, he puts his Bible down and decides, what, I can't deal with whatever in the hell this thing is. I need to go, and I'm going to leave tomorrow morning. He had a long distance to travel, and he wasn't about to do it with this thing relatively in the area. So he was assuming it would go away like it did before, and he can skedaddle in the morning. Now, it's only like 6 o'clock in the evening at this point when it's dark. And one of the things that he had conveyed to me is he had a very thick door. He had a big piece of lumber that locked the door from opening. He had internal shutters and whatnot, and he still didn't feel safe. He said the thing was massive. He said he was so terrified in an instant, he only got a glimpse of its eyes, and he conveyed them very similar to what I saw, like a translucent black marble. just not, you could tell it was alive, but like it looked dead inside, like it was soulless, his words. Now, having seen these eyes he's talking about, I've said it before that the graphic art for my thumbnails with the Sasquatch eyes, that's the face I saw looking at me in the window. You know. Um, anyway, so as the evening's progressing, he shut the shutters because he was just spooked. He was shook. And as he's doing this and he's sitting back on his bed, he had lost his appetite, but he had finished cooking because he didn't want to waste his supplies. So he cooked and just kind of forced himself to eat, and he was feeling like a real upset stomach from it. So he sipped a little more whiskey. Now, understand, he wasn't a drunk or an alcoholic. He just literally sipped on whiskey to chill out at the end of his day. So he was doing that, and he was contemplating his move, what trail he was going to take out of there, because he had a couple different options to get to the main trail, and he was contemplating the one with the least amount of woods, the least amount of cover nearby the trail. He was genuinely concerned, and this thing is looking at him. I mean, can you imagine how that would feel? You're looking out thinking you're getting the drop on something, and all of a sudden it's just like, hey, what are you looking for? Ugh, good God. Anyway, so he's doing his thing and he's mellowing out because everything's quiet. Now, the only shutters he didn't shut were the ones near his bed because he was contemplating shooting this thing. He was contemplating, if it looks in the window again, I'm going to blow its head off and I'll drag it to town and show everybody, And he let that thought go because of this thing's size. He said it had to have been every bit of 10 foot tall, because when it looked at him, when he glanced over, he could tell it was hunched down to look at him in the window. Whew. Anyway, so as he's contemplating all these things, and he's hearing this weird bump, bump, and he's like, man, he's concerned for his snow machine that's out in that little shed. Now, the little doors on this thing is just to keep the snow from going in there, so he doesn't have to dig his sled out every time it snows. It's not much of a shack, I mean, it's basically a lean-to, a glorified lean-to with a couple little plywood doors just to keep the snow out. It's not built for real security, So as he's doing that, or as that sound is happening, he gets up and he puts on his parka, and he's making sure his rifle has ammo in it. And he was going to take the pistol he had, but the pistol was just a .22 Magnum for spruce grouse and stuff. And he was like, I'd rather not use something that small a caliber. And he had serious doubts about his 30-06 doing anything as well, and rightfully so. Anyway, so he decides he's going to open the door and look over by the shed. Now, he didn't have any electricity. He had an old school spotlight flashlight that he used very sparingly, and usually only on the trail to beam across the rivers and creeks and stuff to look for overflow. He didn't have it for just searching. It was very utilitarian, and its purpose was just to spotlight creeks for overflow and potential fall through dangers, right? Which a mayor of a local, not local, but a mayor of a Pilot Station just recently fell through the ice, and God bless him and his family. My heart goes out to them. So it's real. Those dangers out in Alaska are very real, and they happen all the time, unfortunately. So he's plotting this thing, so he decides he's going to make use of this spotlight and beam over and see what was going on. Now he beams over after he opens the door, and he hears running off to his right-hand side. So it had been at the corner of his cabin, made noise out at the shed, and was waiting at the cabin. He opens the door. I'm speculating. I don't know if the thing saw him leading out with the gun and decided to go, or if it just, okay, he came out, he's going to fall for it, and ran off into the tree line. Now, as it ran off into the tree line, he's kind of spooked, like, man, it was right there. And so he's using this antiquated spotlight, as we'll call it, and he's looking around with it, and it's not much help. but it's lighting up some areas and he's not seeing anything. And so he swings back towards the shed, and when he gets to the shed, he notices it's been pushed a little bit. It's offset from what it normally is. And he knows he built it well for snow load. Structurally, with downward pressure. It just wasn't built to keep the burglars out. You know what I mean? It was just a simple little shed. So as he does that, there's nothing, the weird sound. He's just about to get back inside because there was no target to shoot at, so to speak, or nothing to run off because it sounded like it ran off. Now, where he's at, he's in a horseshoe shape of open area in between these trees that had been cut down a long time ago. He doesn't have much room. He's got about 30 to 50 feet total, at varying distances from the cabin, that horseshoe around the cabin, and his trail's in front with the shed there. Now, across the trail, it's just a heavy tree line. The trail cuts through heavy trees. Okay, so he's basically in one hollowed out spot in the woods, and the rest is dense forest. And as he's just about to shut the door, and he was just going to shut off the light, and as soon as he hit the little button, he noticed eye shine. Just a quick flash of eye shine. So he turns it back on in the spot, and the eye shine he saw was red, and it just leaned behind a tree out of sight. So he shut the door, put the block on it. Didn't want no part of that stuff. So he's real spooked. He goes back, he sits down, and he's contemplating, what am I going to do? This thing's really curious about me. It's really trying to figure me out. It's attempting to lure me out. It's stared at me in the window. What does this thing want? And he said he was borderline, thought he was losing his mind, and he knew that no one was ever going to believe him, and that's a very lonely feeling, to sit there and feel not believed when you're dealing with something traumatic. It's very disheartening. Anyway, so he's down for the night. He just wants to call it a day and go to bed. He takes a couple quick, snips off the bottle and lays down to call it a night. Made sure all the internal shutters were shut and secured, and went to bed. He was woken up to that same thumping. He wasn't sure how much longer. He could tell there was doves or something carved into the indoor shutters just to let some light in when they were closed. And so he got up to peek and see if he could see anything of what was making that noise. He couldn't make out anything. It was too pitch black, and it was the kind of darkness outside where you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. So he quickly dismissed trying to mess with anything and laid back down. He just wanted some daylight to just get clear of that area. At least he knew of a buddy about 20 miles away with another cabin. He knew he was in the area, and his plan was to leave where he was in the morning, get to his buddy's cabin, and then from there it's in a lot perceived safer place, and maybe his buddy can help him collect his gear from this cabin together, and he'd just leave the area. He wasn't going to trap. So with his plan set in mind, falls back asleep. He's woken up again. He doesn't know how much longer later, and when he looks out again, he notices there's light on the horizon, so he knows it's going to be daylight enough soon. Now, the noise he heard was the same pounding, but the pounding was originating on the back opposite corner of where his bed was on his cabin. Bump, 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 bump. He said it was at a regular cadence, regular intervals, just bump, bump. He said it was almost like a heartbeat, and that scared him, because when his blood pressure went up and he could feel his heart beating in his chest, this thing was bump, 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 pounding, almost like it could hear his heartbeat. Ugh. Holy shit, man. So, talk about creep factor. So, and this, he didn't know for sure, but he said that's what it felt like in the moment. And, I mean, can you imagine just feeling your heartbeat in your eyes, where your blood pressure is so high, it's just thump, 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 and something's pounding on the wall to mimic it? So he's obviously not going to fall back asleep. So he's immediately gathering up his gear, and what he wants to do is try to end this thing because he feels like it's stalking him. Like it has an end game that he doesn't want to be part of. So he's going to go confront this thing. Fair enough. I get it. He's had it, and I mean, it's been a handful of hours or two, a couple handfuls of hours that this continuing issue was going on. So he tries to beam out through the shutters and wasn't having much luck, so he had to open the shutter. And he's beaming out towards his little snow machine shed, and he notices the awning part where his traps hung under, where they got all flung from, had been kind of removed, and it was laying on the ground. So this little lean-to roof and its posts were just pulled away from the shed and basically laid on the ground. Couldn't see any of his traps, none of that, and he was really bummed out. He's losing a lot of money in the traps, and he's losing a really rich source of furs where he's at the moment. But he's over it. And as he's done beaming, same thing happens. He was just about to shut it off, and he notices eye shine. And the eye shine was originating from just straight across from his window. The shed's just a little offset to the left, and the eye shine was just almost directly in front of him. But he said this eye shine was a lot lower to the ground, and the eyes were a lot closer together. And he was trying to play. He was like, "Nah, there's no way that's a bear," because it didn't feel the same as this big thing going around the cabin. And so he shut the shutters, put the brace on there, and he goes back to sitting down, and he's getting his stuff together, and he's getting himself just his backpack of immediate needs, extra ammo, anything important. He plans on coming back with his friend to shut the cabin down, basically, and get out of Dodge. So, has everything, and he's contemplating, gosh, if this thing's right behind the house, I may not be able to just get to the shed, fire up the snow machine, and go. Because he has to add fuel to the snow machine. He has to do some prep work. So he knows he needs a little bit of time in there to, be able to go. I mean, it was like 23, 24 below zero. It's hard enough to start a snow machine on the best of days, especially back then. They don't have the technology we do now. So he decides and gets it set in his mind he's going to shoot this thing before making his escape. So, mindset, he wasn't going to stop. So he basically, said some prayers, opened the door, and started actively looking for this thing. He wanted to let it know. So, upon doing so, he opens the door, and he hears two sets of tracks run off from either corner of the cabin. And he's like, shit. Steps out the door and turns on his weak flashlight in the direction the first one ran. He sees eye shine peeking out behind a tree every so often, so it was doing that at a regular enough cadence to where he timed it. As soon as it ducked back, he knew it was about to pop out. He'd shoot. Boom! He heard a scream. Horrific scream. Trees started thrashing, and it sounded like it was moving away, kind of like in a zigzag pattern, like it was just running around, just... And he said it terrified him, and he felt himself wetting himself. I don't mean to laugh. I'm just envisioning this in my mind, like, how, good God. And immediately he realizes there's two, and he turned and looked the other direction, and he saw the one that had run off to his left out the door was just inside the trees, cutting around to the back side of the cabin. So he assumes, okay, that one's running to assist the one over there. So he turns and goes right to the shed. Starts cranking away to fire up the snow machine. Finally, it gets started. Now, his field of view is very limited. He's got the door he drives out of and the door he drove into. So it's basically got a door on each side to drive through. Now, as it's warming up, he's rubbernecking back and forth. He just shot one in the face. He assumes he shot it in the face. He didn't see for sure. There was just a scream and thrashing, and it sounded like a wounded animal. So he assumed he got that one, and the other one was on its way over there. So as a direct line of sight, if he was to be able to see, all that happened, all that commotion that was going on was less than 30 yards away. Just right over there. Yeah, and all this chaos is going on, and he's trying to hear with this snow machine warming up. And he's in the shed. So it's reverberating sound. He really can't hear what's going on, and so he is spooked. He's on super what the fuck mode, you know? And so he's rubbernecking back and forth, and finally the engine changed idle just a little bit, and he knew it was warm enough he could feather and keep it running because he wanted out. So he feathers, and sure enough, it starts moving. It didn't stall out. It didn't die. And so he starts, slowly giving it throttle, and he was trying not to look back. He kept trying his best not to look back because he didn't want to see something right on him because he knew it would just freak him out. But he couldn't help himself. He looks back, and the smaller of the two creatures, the one that had run to go and see what was up with the one screaming and thrashing around, was behind him a ways, but it was trying to catch up rather quickly. Now, he's trying to still warm up this old-ass snow machine. Well, it was new then, but he was trying to warm up the snow machine because if he tried to floor it, it would just bog out. Brr. And he knew that, so he was feathering it, trying to, help it warm up. You got to remember, below 20 below zero? Come on. That is cold. Very cold. If you ain't felt it, then you wouldn't understand. It's hard to move anything. It just horribly cold. Even when you're used to it, man, screw that. It sucks. So he's feathering, and he realizes this thing is going to get him. He's scared. Yeah, I mean, he's panicked. He almost jumps off the sled and just covers up and gives up. That's how terrified he was. Now, he decides, okay, I'm going to stop the snow machine. It should be warm enough that it'll idle when I let off the throttle, and I'll turn and I'll shoot this I'm going to shoot this sumbitch too. And he does. He stops on his trail, turns around, pulls up the gun, and he doesn't see it. It's no longer on his trail behind him. Now, this trail is cutting through the deep woods. It's not like he has a big buffer zone of area to see. No. The trees are right up on his trail zigzags through the trees. So he's on super high alert. He's looking every direction he can and listen for noise. With the snow machine running, it's not that hard. I mean, it's not that easy to hear other sounds because a two-stroke motor, it makes a lot of noise. And back then, the technology didn't account for a good muffler system. Trust me. So he's trying to find a target. Can't find it. Slings the rifle on front so he has a better grip of it instead of over his shoulder and behind him. And takes off again. Now, as he clears the trees and gets out in the more open, he stops and he looks back. And just as he looks back, he saw this thing cross the path just inside the tree line. So he's looking back at his own path, and this thing crosses the trees like that, going in a different direction. So he's like, okay, it just ran me out of that tree area, and it's going somewhere else. He takes off out of there, and he heads to his buddy's cabin. His buddy was there, but his buddy was out on his trap line. Now, when he gets to his buddy's place, he's screaming for him, hey, hey, hey. And he doesn't want to be outside. He's spooked. It's not even, wintertime. It's barely getting light out, And so, excuse me. He goes into his buddy's cabin to wait for him. Leaves the snow machine visible so his buddy would know he was there. Now, a couple hours had passed, and his buddy comes back. His buddy comes back in a hurry. Didn't see his snow machine. Came in, slammed the door, and is doing all this stuff. And he goes, hey, how is it? And startled his friend to shit. He said his friend almost had a heart attack. He fell back against the wall, grasping his chest like, what the hell? And he goes, oh, whoa, I'm sorry. I got run off from my cabin. And his buddy commences to tell him, well, if I was just getting ready to gather some stuff to come get you. There's something that was screaming at me back over here. And immediately they both gathered up their stuff. Well, the initial trapper had everything gathered already. But his buddy gathered up some stuff. They went out, they topped off their fuel, they strapped some fuel into the little backside of their snow machines, and they got out of there. So this thing ran one trapper out of his cabin. He shot one. Doesn't know if it died or if it ran off or whatever, but he was aiming for the face, so who knows. Then the smaller of the two chases him out of there. He gets to his friend's house. He thought relatively free and clear, and then his friend shows up. Something was screaming at him. So, I mean, gosh, that would stop me from freaking trapping ever again. That's for damn sure. I wouldn't want no parts of that shit. He didn't specify what happened from there. He just said they left and got out of there. Went to another friend's place, and then they ended up going into Bethel and whatnot and getting trash drunk for like a week. No one believed them, you know. So, what do you do with that? You just drink away your sorrows, you know. So, anyway, that being, thanks for the new subscribers showing up to check us out. Hope you enjoy. Outdoor Alaskan, like scenery and stuff. There's a bunch of that coming. I would read these outside somewhere, but someone already does that. You know what I mean? So I'm not trying to ride anyone's coattails. I'd rather do it my way. So anyone who wants to share their experience, Alaskan Harryman Project at gmail.com or nocomp907 at gmail.com. Thanks again, everyone joining, and I'll keep you guys updated on the documentary, my conversation with tribal council elders, and also the nature of the grant. And anyone wishing to donate, there's an option in the channel description, not the video description. So anyone interested in that, feel free. And thanks for joining us.